Yes. Yeah, it seems to be recording now. Cool. Okay. Hey, everyone. So today we're going to talk about the CAPI operator, which there's a proposal that's merged for that already. And it came up on the call last week that Warren is no longer be able to work on this and lead that effort. So some of the folks from Red Hat and some other interested parties are still interested in this operator and want to take over and kind of keep going with that project. So I've attached a document today, which hopefully means we can discuss, what the current state is, what the work needs going forward, what dates are, and basically how we can continue with this project and where we want to take it in the future. The first thing that I thought would be good to do is just have a quick checkup on the history of the proposal, and yeah, go from there. So in terms of the state of the proposal, it's merged with a target of V1 Alpha 4. What does that actually mean in terms of like dates and what needs to be done?
If we stick with the V1 Alpha 4, I think that if I remember well, the release date is planned for June. I remember well, Vince, or April?
April 15th.
April 15th, sorry.
So if we want to stick with the Alpha 4, we need to get all of the implementation for this operator done by April 15th, which is 7 weeks.
I think it's at least 2 weeks before that, in terms of code freeze date, if I remember correctly. There was a timeline in the CAPI Google Doc, which I forgot to send the mailing list.
Okay. And in terms of the current state of the implementation, I don't know if we'd be able to talk about what's already happened so that we've got an idea of like where we are at in terms of like how implemented it is.
I have added some node, maybe then Warren could chime in. So the design of the operator builds on top of the new model for managing multiple credentials. And the work for this new model is almost done, both in CAPI and also in, as far as I know, in some provider. So that means that all the dependencies or the predecessor are already in place, and the operator work could actually start. Warren did an amazing job in basically preparing a work breakdown, and this is documented in a command file, which is linked here and also linked to an issue. And the TLDR of this document is that basically the work was organized in 2 macro phases. The first one was basically to build the actual operator, and this work is basically is out of the critical path, so it's not blocking everything else, it's not making test failing, and then as soon as the operator was basically ready, we were planning to make cluster cattle to use the operator. This part is a little bit more critical because as soon as you start touching cluster cattle in it, basically you get a test failing, and so this one requires a little bit more of attention.
Is it possible that we could build something useful by just doing phase 1 in the V1 Alpha 4? I'm just wondering, like, if we don't end up hitting that both milestones, I guess.
If I can give my opinion, yes. So definitely we are still interested in the operator, and we are just, as everyone were, we are just, we don't have the resources to put it now due to reason, but we are still interested. So if everyone starts and goes in the same direction, we are more than happy. Vince, I don't know if you want to add something on that.
At some point, we'll have to make the switch. I guess we just don't have the ability to make the switch in Alpha 4, given the timeline that we have. So maybe end of the year or like early next year. So like kind of phase it out a little bit more would be best. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we've got, I see there's 3 PRs linked, which obviously are implementing part of the phase 1. Warren, are you happy for us to kind of like pick those and the changes you've done and continue with those?
Yeah, so the first 3 PRs, they essentially are just stacks on top. So once the first PR, the initial PR gets merged in, then we just start rebasing onto the next 2. But most of that is essentially just scaffolding work, you know, sort of the make files and the cube builder, all the generated work. There's no actual logic in there, but yeah, I mean, it gets you to a good state where, you know, you can build the Docker files and actually start like, you know, deploying things to a cluster and testing it out. Yeah, so you definitely feel free to, I think right now the PRs are still open, but they're in like draft mode. I'm sure the maintainers have access to do whatever and give you all permission to do whatever.
Yeah, I have a question here. So these PRs are in draft state. Do you plan like to finish them so they get merged, or should someone else pick them up?
So they're technically all, in my opinion, like they were all ready to be reviewed and merged in. So as soon as like, I think the first one, which was 4117 got merged in, I would have just rebased it. And like, I think they're ready to be merged in. The reason I did it that way is because I was trying to do it in a incremental sort of addition. Obviously in the beginning, because cube builders, most of it's generated, it's still like extra large size PRs. But if you look at the commits, I guess the only thing I could do is sort of squash commits before merging in, but they're all ready. I think they're, at least I'm confident they're ready, but obviously PR reviews, right? So yeah.
So in that case, is it worth marking them as ready, or the first one at least? And would you have time to, you know, if there's very little change, to carry those on, or would you prefer if someone else just like took over the PR and the responsibility for fixing any review comments?
I'm okay if you know, if the community is okay with it. I'm okay like sort of shepherding a bit of that work in. I have a little bit of downtime right now anyways, but if there's somebody else who sort of wants to, like, you know, essentially if they want to have context of what was done before, then they can sort of pair on it too and take responsibility for merging it. I'm okay either way. I unless there's like major reworks or changes for those PRs, I'm fine like fixing a few things here and there and then like just, you know, firing them off.
I think that like if your PRs are ready and no one is against this, we can just merge them and start improving it from that point where I mean you left them. So it doesn't take your time if you don't have it. So like if it's fine for everyone, then we can use this approach.
If we merge them into the main branch, though, like it becomes incomplete code that like it might be have to shipped out like with 040. So then that puts us in a weird spot where like we're release blocking. Does that make sense? So either like if we're confident we can ship it by April, like or like late March, like I'm not opposed, but if we're not, like we should either use a different branch or yeah, especially because like there might be a lot of changes and a lot of iterations on it. So happy to just have a different branch with different approvers so that, you know, things can proceed smoothly.
Warren, you raised your hand?
Yeah. So yeah, my suggestion there is at first I wasn't sure myself if it should be in like in an experimental folder, if the operator should be in an experimental folder. If you look at the first PR, it's actually merging it straight into like the top level directory of cluster API. So that could be actually one of those changes if we feel like we can't ship everything by whatever April 15th or rather April 1st. Otherwise, we can take a look at like reducing the scope of what we are expecting to deliver by that date for V1 Alpha 4. For example, like Fabrizio mentioned, like the phase 1, phase 2. I would basically say like let's leave cluster cuddle out of this first V1 Alpha 4 delivery, and then just work towards phase 1. Because it's not just the features, but it's like also having relevant tests and everything, right? For these things, and it's quite a bit of work. And if you look at that HackMD doc, I've sort of tried to break it down to sort of bite-sized chunk. So it could be parallelized to a certain extent. But yeah, I would say either if you're putting it in the main branch, then let's look at the scope of work that needs to be done and sort of reduce that to something that's doable, or just drop it in some, I don't know what the other path forward is, like either another branch or an experimental folder, or I don't know.
Is there an option for a different repo, or is that just going to complicate things further down the line?
Probably will complicate lots of things, but we can check. Maybe we can do a temporary one that then goes away. The thing is, like, then you'll have to set up the whole test infrastructure and test infra and whatnot, which comes with a cost.
Yeah, good point.
I also have a question about separate branch. Do you think there is any risk of rebase conflicts later once we start merging operator branch into main branch, or that's like not an issue?
As long as the code doesn't touch the rest of the code base, we don't have to merge the branch itself. We could just copy the folder and just open a new PR with the operator working. I don't see many issues with that. We have previous history. I think Zach has mentioned the upgrade tool, which then became KCP, but the upgrade tool itself was in a different VMware owned repo, and then it kind of got deprecated, and part of it in terms of code came out to be KCP, but it actually changed because one was a CLI and the other one was an operator.
So it sounds like a separate branch might be the way to go here then, for giving us time to hack on it, and then if we don't meet the deadlines, we can just say, okay, this won't merge for V1 Alpha 4.
I can update my PRs then to, I can create another branch and then have it merged to that branch.
Is anyone able to create a second branch for this? Because I don't know if we're going to have people with permissions or something on the repo to do that. Vince can. Okay.
Yeah, I got superpowers, but I was thinking even for a separate branch, we actually have to set up test infra. So maybe it's not, if we prefer the separate repo, we can go down that path. We'll just need SIG leads to sponsor that temporary repo for now. It might also give us more room for experimentation without, especially for upgrades. So from Alpha 3 to Alpha 4.
Just really quickly, what would be the issue with putting it in the experimental folder? EXP and just have the operator live there?
It does. I don't think it's. It was originally supposed to be like controllers rather than like, like an operator for Cluster API that manages its life cycle, if that makes sense. Like types that are like included in Cluster API and it will ship. We can see that too, but then I guess like we'll have to add a feature gate to Cluster API that says is the operator enabled. The thing is like the CRDs will get installed regardless, and that's what I don't like about the experimental folder is that like there might be clusters that have like a dangling CRDs, and then we'll have to overwrite them, which Cluster Kernel CLI does that today when you upgrade. But given that this is like a management layer on top of it, like that's why I was thinking like maybe a separate repo, temporary repo would be a good way to go, or a branch. Yeah.
I'm just like thinking about like if we have time pressure and we think we can get something in V1 Alpha 4, then adding on the additional work of setting up CI, looking for sponsors and so on. Then we can just basically stop thinking about V1 Alpha 4 altogether, in my opinion, because it's just going to reduce the time we have for actual implementation.
I mean, from everything that we're talking about here, it just seems like the timeline is actually going to be next release.
Yeah.
So like maybe Alpha 5, maybe a Beta 1. We'll see how things go.
Okay, I wonder if we should table this and move on to some of the other stuff. Does anyone have anything else they want to add about the history or any questions before we move on? Nope. Okay. So the next part I wanted to discuss was kind of like the future in terms of like what are the requirements? Because I know we've got various different interested parties in this from various different companies. So what are we actually looking for from this operator long term? And like in terms of Red Hat's interest in this, we want to long term be able to manage multiple CAPI installations in multiple namespaces. So like if no one else wants that, it's probably not worth us getting involved here. Like what kind of requirements do other people have?
I can only say from my side, Giant Swarm, we are also interested in like having multiple CAPI installations, possibly even in the same namespace, but you know the deal. It's like all very complicated, but yeah, this is what I'm looking for mostly. And I know it's currently not in the proposal because I participated in the original PRs. But then again, I'm open to helping even if we don't include this in the immediate goals, but just have this on some kind of roadmap or like idea that sometime in the future we might support this.
When I was reading the proposal this morning, I sort of got the impression that it was designed in a way that this could be like a future goal. Is that something, yeah, Warren's nodding as if that's something he had in mind when he was writing that. If that, obviously like we're happy to get involved and keep that as a future goal for now, but like what we don't want to do is like the community to sort of 6 months down the line be like, oh no, we're going to change our mind on this. So I guess we're kind of looking for some commitment that is something we're going to be able to do long term. But
I think in the fullness of time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So so in VMware we were using multiple installation of CAPI, and we moved away because it basically brings problem back. So we are not interested in this. from the same time, at least in my opinion, I don't want to block on this, but what I really would like is to see a proper design, because we faced many problems, and cluster cutter code is full of this code. If you look at there are management groups. We were forced to invent abstraction that impacted on the CLI and stuff like that. And so I would like to see a good alternative to this initial implementation that we didn't find enough robust, and basically most important, to the really nasty problem that in a cluster there could be only a version of the webhook, which is the major broker for this solution. So this is, if the community want to go to this, I'm not opposed. What is important is that cluster cutter remains consistent with this way of work, and that we have let me say, someone that take charge of the additional complexity that we are putting in.
So I think that it sounds like you've got some really useful insight into why that kind of CAPI multi-namespace thing may not work. Like, I think we're totally happy to start investigating those issues and try and come up with some solutions, but obviously we don't have that same context. So it'd be really great if we could understand a bit more about the issues you've seen, and then we can start investigating those. So I don't know.
I'm happy to share the background. I already updated a document in the book with some of this insight, and I can also add the color if we schedule a separate meeting for this.
That'd be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Vince, you were going to say something?
Yeah, like just building on top of what Fabrizio mentioned, like I think in the fullness of time we'll need to nail down the actual limitations that we want to put in place if we want to actually do support running multiple things in multiple namespaces, as in like the limitations should be coded and like it guards against like certain scenarios. Like Fabrizio mentioned, like you can only have one webhook, but the webhooks, like both the defaulting, validation, and conversion webhooks are all considered part of the code. So like, for example, when you create a machine or a cluster, defaulting is, even for like one of the fields, like that might be a pointer, just to provide an example, is defaulted to like maybe the struct, so like we could actually use it in code as just without like checking nil values and things like that. But it's also like more complicated defaulting or validations that like is in place in the webhooks that are they're going to be hard, especially because sometimes we push a fix in the webhook, and then there is like a fix needed in the controller as well. So those lockstep behavior are going to be really, really hard to actually think about when you have different controllers on separate versions, perhaps, that are running different code, and then they don't agree on something. So you get panics behavior and things like that, which we all saw for things like these. The other thing is validation. On the validation side, like if we, over time, we have allowed more and more things to be mutable. So like we usually start with like a lot of immutability fields, like you can only set once. KCP is a good example of that. If those fields become immutable and one of the controllers does not understand them, there might be unexpected behaviors that are going to come up. So these are all things like kind of need answers, and trying to kind of enumerate them.
Yeah, this is all like really valuable for us to like then go away and try and resolve some of this. Like we've done some internal research on this kind of thing as well. And like some of the limitations we were thinking about is, you know, what if everything has to be the same version, even though you've got these multiple CAPIs or something like that. So I guess that's something we can discuss in the future. Okay, does anyone have anything else to add to this particular part of the conversation?
The other requirement from VMware would be extensive testing, like we did for Cluster Cuddle and all the other controllers. Like we'll need something similar for the operator that tests, like, for example, upgrades, test like all these scenarios. Like if you want to add a feature, like we want to install multiple CAPI or KCP or whatever, like we should have proper tests to do so. And this could be both as like periodics and like PR blocking. We're also able to kind of like say the PR blocking only run when Cluster Cuddle code changes, for example. So we can be flexible on those.
Yeah, I think that's a hard requirement from us as well to add like proper testing for that kind of thing.
+1 for tests.
Just a question from my side here. When we talk about testing here, we talk about full end-to-end testing that we spin up an actual CAPI cluster and check if it works, or we talk about we have an input for the operator, we validate the output of the operator, which doesn't necessarily create a true CAPI cluster afterwards.
Yes, everything that you just said.
Okay.
We do have a lot of things like these though, like so like you should be able to kind of copy paste like a lot of that code and jobs that like actually do spin up CAPI cluster. A lot of times using Cluster Cuddle CLI, so those will have to move to Cluster Cuddle operator to make sure that they behave the exact, well, not the exact same, but similarly at least. Fabrizio can speak more to those, and Warren as well, I think.
Is that the kind of thing where like CAPD can be used to simulate a cluster, right?
Yeah, we have both. We have test, let me say, we have unit test, we have an integration test using controller runtime test dev, and we have end-to-end test. So.
My only concern would be because of personal experience, because we have internally similar operators that like create CRs for then different operators or controllers, is that the flappiness of the end-to-end tests seems to increase when you start chaining them together like this. It's something we will have to see. I don't think it's like necessarily a big problem, but that's just something we observed internally, because like each controller is eventually consistent, that this can sometimes build up.
Yeah, agreed. So this is a potential problem in the Cluster API end-to-end framework. There are a lot of tricks to get around this problem. So we are using different namespace, stuff like that. But at the end, when using Cluster API and CAPD, there is a limited amount of scenario that you can run in parallel, and you have to break down scenario in different jobs.
Yeah.
But
okay.
This is manageable.
Yeah, sure. It's manageable. It's just the effort is dependent.
I think the end-to-end testing is sort of critical for something like this because, Marcel, like in the beginning, like when we were having these discussions, one of the concerns for like the current proposal or moving towards the sort of the simpler model was because there was no confidence in even between upgrading between patch releases. So if we're going to add this complexity of having multiple controllers in the same cluster, then we need to have this sort of confidence in our tests, right? And in the output of this.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I completely agree. Just my point of view would be to invest more into lower cost testing, like more into different variations of unit tests, different stages before full end-to-end tests, simply because they can get similar results usually quicker and without as much flappiness, at least in our experience. I don't have too much experience with end-to-end testing in CAPI, so I might be completely off here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you follow like the testing pyramid, yeah, obviously you start with solid base of unit and probably leveraging env test as well to test some of these. But yeah.
Leveraging it as much as possible. Like obviously there are limitations in env test, but there's still a lot you can do.
Okay. I did add some extra questions in this section, but I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of those with the existing conversation we've had. Yeah, it doesn't sound like we've got any blockers for potentially going down this route. It's just a case of we need to make sure we've got a thorough proposal and have thought through all of the issues that have been highlighted. Okay. In terms of the implementation, just wanted to check up if there's any like guidance or anything we should know before like we start trying to hack on this. You know, is there an idea that we can start reusing bits from code from Clustercuttle, for instance, or is it pretty much a from scratch, build it to the design?
If I can add something, so at least in the discussion from Warren and even while working on the proposal, the idea was to basically reuse most of the work in Clustercuttle, and in fact, the operator is at the end of the story is going to replace a bit of the Clustercuttle. So for instance, I have the code, the install provider, now it is in Clustercuttle. Initially I use both in Clustercuttle and in the operator, and at the end of the story, the operator, Clustercuttle used the operator, so the code is basically moved into the operator. But the operations are the same, so this was the idea to reuse most of what is Clustercuttle still holds for me.
Great, that sounds good. Anything else, or is it?
I have a question. In the end, which part will be responsible for deploying cert manager? Will it be operator or Clustercuttle?
Cert manager is out of scope of the operator, and even in Clustercuttle, the assumption is that Clustercuttle is going to handle this separately. But even in Clustercuttle, there are a bunch of issues about how to manage the operator. So make it possible to skip, about how to manage the cert manager. So there are people requiring possibility to skip to automatic install of the cert manager because they want to bring in their own version. There are people asking to skip upgrade for the cert manager. So the TLDR is that Clustercuttle will be responsible for cert manager. I'm not sure if it will work in the same way as of today.
And one more question from me. Imagine I am an end user of Cluster API. I want to bring it up, like I want to install it. We now have operator, we now have Clustercuttle. Which command should I run to get it running? Like, will it be as easy as it is right now, or like how will that work?
So the proposal talks a little bit about this, if I remember well. So please, Warren, chime in if I'm saying something wrong. So at the end of the story, there will be two possible approaches for spinning up a cluster. One, it is, let me say, imperative using the Clustercuttle, and the workflow should be as simple as today. So possible better, but let's keep it as simple as today as a goal. And then there will be a second workflow that today is not possible, which will be fully declarative. So you can basically create a cluster without using cluster cutter, but only applying resources.
If I want to install cluster API using operator, I will also need to install all CRDs manually.
Yeah, so it will be provided. The idea is as part of the make commands, right? That will be part of the release assets of cluster API. So if you had, let's say, a empty like kind cluster, you could just kubectl apply the operator assets, which would include all the provider CRDs, right? Provider CRD, sorry, the CRDs is defined by that will be used by the operator, and then when you say, oh, I want to install like this core provider, this bootstrap provider, this KCP, whatever with whatever versions, then yes, you would like generate those YAMLs and kubectl apply that. That is the route of that's outside of cluster cuddle, right? If you didn't want to use that.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else there? Okay. The next question that came to mind was like, how do we want to divide the work? And I guess the HackMD, I unfortunately haven't had a chance to read yet, sort of goes towards that a bit.
Yeah, so the way I was sort of breaking and this is the HackMD thing was how I sort of tried to break it down in my head. Whoever is sort of, Joel, if you're, you and the rest of Red Hat is sort of leading this, feel free to do however y'all feel best. My background is usually, small, break everything down to small bite-sized chunks. So for example, in some of the HackMD, let me see if I can pull that up quickly.
You want me to load it and share it? That might be
Yeah, if you can, that'd be great. That link is good. Yeah, so the striped outs, so the workflow is just how I sort of broke it down in my head, of like breaking it down by implementing the operator first and then the APIs and CRDs, and then eventually cluster cuddle comes in last. The stuff that's crossed out is the PRs that are in there already. But as you can see, like sort of, I broke it down of like, what is the simplest thing that can be done in small chunks. So first thing obviously is installing some of the providers. So that can be done in two ways, right? You have these different fetch configurations. If you look at some of the other examples, if you scroll down, yeah, so there's like, stories that like in the API, right? From the proposal feedback, they were saying, okay, we want to add tolerations, affinity, and node selector. So those could be sort of added in to the API separately. And then somebody else could say, oh, I need to add in, things for, I don't know, fetch configuration selector, or we need to have this API handle, what is the next one, right? As an admin, I would like to install, the provider status contract. So the contract version needs to be a part of the provider status. So I tried in my head to sort of break it down into chunks of work that really doesn't necessarily clobber, they're just additions to the API, right? You're not just like jamming everything in. That was my sort of way in my head. Obviously doing it this way is very slow and tedious versus just like, putting in all the APIs in and then just flushing it out. But the way I thought of this is then each story sort of comes with its own set of tests. And that way the PRs could be sort of, chunked up properly. Yeah, and again, this is not supposed to be an exhaustive list of the stories. I just sort of, being very familiar with the proposal, I sort of pulled each thing out from there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it makes sense for us to kind of use this as a, as the sort of list of tasks that need doing, and as people want to tackle a part, they assign themselves by putting their name next to a bit, and then when it's done, they cross it out. Maybe that's because the alternative I see is like creating a whole bunch of issues to track this, and I don't know if that's just going to clutter.
So that was I was discussing with Fabrizio and Vince as to like because this was like a pretty big chunk of work that I hadn't really been part of before, and in these open source projects. My idea was initially was like, yeah, somebody would sort of create these issues, or whoever would take on the work would actually create a detailed GitHub issue. Because in the end, this hackmd should just like, can be lost, and people can still, 6 months down the line, go back and take a look. I've been marking the issues that I've been creating and the PRs with the labels area, I think area API, and I did area operator, but I don't know if that operator label has been created. So it was like, I think, throwing errors. That way, people can at least group by the label area operator, for example, or API, and sort of get to see all the work that's being done. The other thing I think Fabrizio was looking at was using the GitHub projects thing, but yeah, that's again up to the community for y'all to figure out if that's a viable path. But otherwise, just take each one of these stories and write detailed GitHub issues of what's expected, and yeah.
Does that sound feasible to people? Like carrying on, like creating these issues and working from those?
It sounds fun to me. We would still need to somehow coordinate that we don't run into issues that multiple people create the same issue or something like this. But I think that's doable.
Yeah, if you're taking the issue from the hackmd, just strike it out. Like just say, okay, it's out of it's been done, or like put the issue number in hackmd if you're starting from there. I foresee though, as you'll go through some of the stuff, you'll be like, oh, Warren wrote this thing, clearly there's more stuff that needs to be done and that can be broken up further. So either you'll sort of rally around the hackmd doc as your sort of synchronous point, or we'll find a different sort of tool, standard project management story tracker of sorts.
Should be doable.
Yeah, I guess we can just try it out. And yeah, I guess my suggestion would be similar to that of Warren's, and just be like, if we create an issue, link it, and then use the issue to track it from there and cross out when it's done. But yeah, we can give it a go and like evolve on this if it's not working. Okay, the only other questions I had is like, in terms of Red Hat commitment, like I'm hoping Alex can spend pretty much all of his time over the next couple of weeks on this. Do we need to have a primary contact for the project, like someone to report back or like be responsible for this or anything?
I think that it will be nice to keep alive the broader community on how this effort is going, especially if we are moving it out of the main repo or in a separated branch, so it is not so visible for everyone. So having, I don't know, a report every 2 weeks or every week, it will be nice just to keep the community informed.
It makes sense. We can make some reports every upstream meeting, like weekly sync, just to give an update of what's going on. But it makes total sense.
But it is not, let me say, require an official contact person. Whoever want to do this, the community will be happy. I think so.
Just to clarify, Joel, that when for this implementation section, we're talking about implementation of the proposal as is, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going for this.
I would have one really technical question, really briefly. Have we thought about like RBAC permissions and how that's supposed to look like? Because we're basically creating a whole bunch of CRs, right? And at least RBAC should be something we think about, because I foresee problems that, like, how do we define them beforehand, or how do we alter them if there's like different providers that maybe are in a different API group or whatever?
Yeah, I think that the simpler answer that is that the cluster API operator is pretty powerful. It is equivalent to cluster cattle today. So at mean, it has to create CRDs, it has to create RBAC rules. So it is really a powerful service account. But
Okay,
for the other side, it automates a set of work. So it is a trade-off. This is why one of the reasons why at the end so it does not create additional risk that today, because you have to it is equivalent to use cluster cattle. If today you use cluster cattle, you have a user which has this power.
Yeah, okay, I agree. We currently don't use cluster cattle, so we have like a separate tool that only has the permissions required. But yeah, I agree from that point. I was just wondering if there was an idea if we can restrict it. If we can't, that's fine.
Every suggestion for the security part will be more than welcome. Currently, the assumption is that this is basically an extension of cluster cattle, so no change of the current threat model.
Yeah, so it would just be system admin and could do anything.
In terms of the way,
fine.
In terms of the way I was looking at this before, like if you are using the CAPI operator and you don't know ahead of time what kind of bootstrap provider, infrastructure providers and stuff you're going to install, there's no way to predict the permission set. So in terms of RBAC, the only way it would be able to work is to basically give it the cluster admin role. In terms of like how we were actually going to use it in the product, we'd know ahead of time what API groups and stuff we need to give it to be able to grant the permissions for the things it's deploying. So I think that's kind of up to whoever's running the operator to kind of come up with whatever they're comfortable with in terms of the permissions. I don't think there's anything we can do blanket wise as a recommendation apart from cluster admin.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I was just wondering if this was something that has been discussed previously.
Yeah, I only add on top of what Joel was saying is that there is also another aspect on this, that is that the cluster cattle or the operator are basically keeping provider components and installing them. So both of them, they don't have a real control of how a provider is done. So I make an example. If someone decided to use stateful set in a provider, or I don't know, persistent volume, or PVC or whatever, there is not yet a filter on what we are installing. So in this sense, the operator cluster cattle are only a proxy of what each provider decides to install.
I agree. The thing I've been just thinking about is we have these fetch configurations, which basically fetch stuff from or providers from the internet. And if a provider were to be hijacked and we don't have any RBAC permissions, then this is obviously a security risk, because then we would have a cluster admin level tool installing whatever we fetch from the provider.
Yeah, I think what they're saying, it makes really sense. So if we can come up with a set of rules that then we promote as a cluster API contract, then we can use the operator to enforce these rules. For instance, we can decide that provider could not use, I don't know, jobs. and the operator, because it does not make sense. So, and the operator will block if a provider YAML contain stuff like that. Of course, this is not a great example, but you can decide to scope down cluster roles, things like that each operator requires.
Okay. Yeah, makes total sense to me. I was just wondering about this because I read the HackMD and the spec and I didn't see this mentioned. So just thinking about it.
Yeah, it makes really sense. What I would like to stress is that this is not a problem itself for the operator. It is a problem of the contract that we have today.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
And so it makes sense to tackle this problem, definitely, in a separate CAPI, and then use the operator to enforce it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm conscious that we've only got 4 minutes till the community meeting. So is there anything else we want to discuss now, or would everyone like a 5-minute break?
I would like a 5-minute break, and thank you very much for volunteering in this work and for this interesting meeting. Very productive.
Yeah,
thank you.
Before we close, I just wanted to thank Warren for coming, even though he's no longer like working for VMware or anything. So yeah, thanks, Warren.
Yeah. Joel, regarding whatever we discuss on the, whether it's a separate repo or a separate branch or whatever, regarding the PRs, feel free to either ping me on GitHub or at me on Slack. I still logged into Kubernetes Slack on my phone, so I should get the notifications. But that would be a fastest way to reach out to me if you need any sort of input on those PRs. Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you at the next meeting.